Healthy families operate on unconditional love, but toxic families run on a completely different system. They operate on a strict transactional ledger, where every member is assigned a calculated, fluctuating value. At 19 years old, Susan Carter's kidneys were failing, but she had secured what she considered a miracle. A classmate had volunteered to be a donor. Susan had a surgery date written on her calendar in blue ink, but that date collided with her family's overriding priority. Her younger sister, Vanessa, was getting married, and the surgery sat exactly 11 days before a lavish, heavily orchestrated wedding. If you look at this balance scale, it maps exactly how Susan's mother managed the family. She could recite the cost of the imported wedding champagne to the penny. She had spreadsheets for the thread count of the tablecloths. But when it came to a life-saving medical procedure, she treated it entirely as a scheduling inconvenience. In a narcissistic family structure, your basic survival is framed as a selfish act the moment it disrupts the plans of the favored child. The doctors were explicit. They warned Susan that pushing the surgery back 6 weeks would cause irreversible damage. She would need emergency dialysis, a catheter placed in her chest, and 3 mornings a week hooked to a machine. Susan brought these medical facts to the family dinner table. Her mother didn't blink. She demanded Susan postpone the surgery so she wouldn't ruin the wedding calendar. Her father stared at his plate and said absolutely nothing. Susan complied. She started dialysis in a cold beige room and watched her sister get married from the back row. She was freezing all the time, wearing a borrowed cardigan, hiding a permanent plastic hospital identification bracelet under her sleeve while the photographer took pictures. Accepting that her value on the family ledger was 0, she packed a single suitcase. She moved 3 hours away, got a job as a small-town librarian, and made a quiet deal with herself to never be an inconvenience or ask anyone for help again. Moving away from a toxic system provides physical safety, but distance alone does not break the internal belief that your worth is still strictly tied to how useful you are to other people. 10 years later, Susan received a phone call from a young lawyer 2 counties over. Susan had lived a completely transparent life. She paid her taxes, had a signed lease, and worked at a public desk. Yet the lawyer told her his office had been trying to find her for years. Her grandmother, the only person who had ever validated her, had died 4 years earlier, and she had quietly left Susan her entire publishing house, along with tens of millions of dollars. This windfall was notarized proof someone looked directly at the family scapegoat and deemed her worthy of everything they had spent a lifetime building. But the will was drawn up well before the wedding ever happened. So how did an inheritance of this size remain entirely hidden from a legally accessible adult for a decade? In a toxic ecosystem, any external validation of the scapegoat poses an immediate threat to the established power dynamics, and the family will suppress that threat at all costs. The law office sent standard certified notifications to Susan's last known address, her parents' house. Here, the paperwork forms a firewall. Susan's mother signed the return receipts, intercepted the documents, and explicitly told the lawyers the heir relocated with no forwarding address. This paper trail existed right alongside a phone call the mother had made to Susan shortly after the funeral. In a perfectly gentle voice, she warned Susan not to get any ideas, claiming the grandmother had died with barely 2 nickels to rub together. The timing of this concealment defined the physical cost of Susan's trauma. Had those letters reached her at 19, she would have possessed the independent wealth to fund her own surgery and recovery. She could have bypassed her father's insurance and her mother's permission, choosing to stay alive without having to ask for a seat at the table. Her mother stole the exact leverage Susan needed to escape the rigged economy, ensuring she remained permanently trapped in the role of a burden. Susan's immediate instinct was to drive straight to her sister's house, drop the physical folder on the coffee table, reveal the fraud, and watch her parents squirm under the weight of the evidence. But what does an apology from a narcissist actually look like? It is never genuine remorse. It is a performance, a strategic retreat staged for whoever happens to be watching. If Susan used the money simply to humiliate her family, she would still be measuring her worth by their reaction. She would be handing the ruler right back into her mother's hands. To break the cycle, Susan contacted the lawyer before the meeting and transferred the entirety of the estate, the publishing house, catalogs, and land, into an irrevocable foundation for free children's libraries. On the family ledger, her personal balance immediately dropped to absolute 0. You cannot negotiate with a toxic family using their own transactional language. The only way to win a rigged game is to permanently remove all of your chips from the table. Susan walked into her sister's house on Sunday afternoon. The living room was staged like a still life, a rehearsed environment where her mother intended to manage the weather and smooth things over. Susan didn't raise her voice. She simply laid out her copy of the paper trail, the will, the forged green cards, and watched her mother's calculated reality completely shatter. Her mother's immediate reflex was to reach right back for the ledger. Even staring at her own fraudulent signatures, she pivoted to asking how they could fairly divide the estate among the four of them. Susan informed them that the money was gone. She had placed the entire inheritance beyond her own reach, so she would never be tempted to use it as a weapon, and they would never be able to use it as a bribe. Before she left, Susan reached into her pocket. She took out that 10-year-old yellowed hospital bracelet and left it on the table right next to the legal folder. She discarded the proof of her trauma because she no longer needed their verdict, and she walked out the door. Freedom arrived the moment Susan stopped trying to balance a rigged ledger. By giving those resources away to children who need them, she replaced her family's cruel arithmetic with something permanent. The safety and validation she was once told she had to earn, now provided to others for free.